Star Trek Nemesis from 2002. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome if you're new. I can't sugarcoat this. This movie causes me great pain. Or I should say, it is as painful to me as a movie is capable of being. Which it is not all that painful, but it's more painful than a movie should be. If that makes any sense. It is, without question, my least favorite Star Trek movie. That includes Star Trek V, Insurrection, and yes, even the J.J. Abrams reboot movies. I think those are better movies than this movie. And I think if I had to point to one thing that sort of signaled the end of Star Trek as we know it, I would point to this movie. I just think it's really bad. It's depressing to think that this was the last Next Generation movie. And yes, they did bring them all back for Star Trek Picard. But unfortunately, if you really look at that show, the stench of Nemesis is all over it. I would say all 3 seasons of that show feel very influenced by Star Trek Nemesis. And that is just bizarre to me. But this movie came out in 2002. And it was a complete disaster, critically, financially. It destroyed the franchise, at least until 2009 with the reboot movies, although I would argue that it's still very much dead as far as I'm concerned. But at least it started making money again in 2009. And I hope I can make this video enjoyable on some level because I feel like I'm just going to be complaining about the movie. And anyone who knows me knows that I have no problem complaining. But when I do, I feel sort of an extra pressure to make it worth listening to. So I guess we'll see if I can accomplish that. And I gotta be honest, I'm gonna be pretty mean to this movie. I mean, I kind of already have, but it's gonna get worse. So if you thought I was unfair to Star Trek Generations or Star Trek Insurrection, then you might be really annoyed by some of the things I'm gonna say here. I'm not gonna hold back at all. So if you do like this movie, maybe you don't even want to watch this video. But if you do watch it, or if you just want to share some reasons for why you think it's good, please feel free to leave a comment. You know, we're not a Borg collective. Different people like different things, and I welcome a friendly disagreement. I should also mention that I watched this with my friend Luke, and neither one of us really enjoyed it. I think both of us had some good observations, and some of my comments may be Luke inspired, so I wanted to give a little bit of credit to him for that before we start. But this is going to be a long-ass video, so we should probably get started. Star Trek Nemesis from 2002, directed by Stuart Baird, starring Patrick Stewart, Brent Spiner, Tom Hardy, and of course, the rest of the Star Trek The Next Generation cast. The movie opens up somewhat surprisingly on Romulus. The music is uninspired, the CGI is lackluster, and we get a look at the Romulan Senate, and some Romulan commanders are arguing for unity between the planets Romulus and Remus. Now, what the hell is Remus? Well, it's apparently a nearby planet that is home to Remans, an offshoot of the Romulan species that we never heard of before or since, which of course means they're also related to Vulcans, but we don't need to get into that. The Praetor rejects this proposal, and the commanders leave the room. And why it's commanders proposing this, I'll never know, because there are higher-ranking people in the Romulan military than commanders. You know, there's admirals. I don't know why it's like starship commanders that are doing this, but whatever. They made a pitch, and it failed. And one of the senators also says she has a meeting with the Tholian ambassador, and she heads out. Which is kind of a nice little reference, because what are the Tholians known for? Setting traps. So she leaves, and she leaves behind a bizarre-looking device on the table that I'm kind of surprised no one has questioned up until now. It opens and sprays green radiation all over the room. We'll later find out that it's called Thalaron radiation. And it basically turns the entire Romulan Senate into kitty litter. Tragic. It's a very weird way to open a Star Trek movie. And then it fades to the wedding of Counselor Troi and Commander Riker. And it's quite festive. Everyone is there. Guinan, even Wesley Crusher. And he has no lines. It's not explained how he's here, but he's here. Dr. Crusher has also gone back to being a redhead. And it turns out that Riker is officially being promoted to captain. And he'll be leaving the Enterprise with Troi to take command on the starship Titan. And Data is slated to become Picard's first officer. And Picard says he'll be training him. And I wouldn't imagine that Data needs all that much training to be first officer. I mean, he's been second officer for 15 years now. If anything, he's probably overqualified. In any case, Picard toasts Riker and Troi, and Data starts singing Blue Skies. It's a whole fiasco. And Worf is somehow already hungover. He had Romulan ale. You know, maybe it's illegal because it doesn't actually get you drunk. It just instantly gives you a hangover. And it must be tough to give Worf a hangover. I mean, don't Klingons drink like 30 barrels of blood wine over a 72-hour period until they're pissing and shitting themselves in the name of honor? And Worf is already, completely shit-faced after a couple of glasses of Romulan ale? And, for an illegal substance, they don't really seem to have a lot of trouble getting a hold of it. Maybe it's only illegal for non-Starfleet personnel. And Picard talks to Troi and Riker. Troi says she's begun briefing Picard's new counselor, who we never meet. And Picard says, "Oh, like hell you are. You already know too much about me," which doesn't really make any sense. It's not like the new counselor is giving Troi information about Picard. It's the other way around. So I don't get it. It's irrelevant, though. So moving on. Turns out that they are headed to Beta Z for a second wedding ceremony, which seems like a little much. But in the Betazoid tradition, it will be a completely nude wedding. Yeah. Betazoids get married in their birthday suits. And apparently all the guests in attendance have to be naked too, which again, doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, if we go all the way back to season 1 of TNG, Troi was engaged and it was going to be a wedding on the Enterprise, but not all the guests were required to be naked. It was the bride and the groom and the two families. But I guess they thought it would be funny to set up the idea that the Next Gen crew will be hanging out naked at a wedding, with their bushes out. And this conversation continues with Worf on the Enterprise. He's apparently over his hangover, and he doesn't want to appear naked at Troy's wedding. And they tease him about it. Picard says, "A handsome, strapping fellow like yourself, what can you possibly be afraid of?" And if this scene took place in the era of New Trek, the answer would probably be that he doesn't want people to know that Klingons have two penises. Because in New Star Trek, it has been established that Klingons have two penises. So, don't let anyone tell you that Alex Kurtzman and his brilliant writing team have failed to bring you anything new, because they've added that brilliant piece of information to Star Trek lore. But let's ignore that, because this takes place before New Trek, so Worf simply just doesn't want to show off his one penis. But moving on, finally, the Enterprise picks up a signal from a nearby planet, and it's a positronic signal. And only androids emit such a signal, specifically Sung-type androids like Data and Lore. So naturally, they want to investigate this before heading to Beta Z. Turns out that it's an uncharted planet close to the neutral zone, the Romulan neutral zone. And it's a little hard to believe that it's uncharted, considering that it's so close to Federation space and maybe even within its boundaries, but whatever. They arrive and find 6 distinct positronic signals spread out over a few kilometers. The population consists of isolated pockets of pre-warp humanoids at an early stage of industrial development. And they can't use the transporter because there's apparently an ion storm down there somewhere. We never see it, but Geordi says it's there, so it must be. And Picard is excited by this. He decides to take Data and Worf with him to the surface in a shuttle, And when they land, they deploy a fucking dune buggy. I mean, what is happening here? The latest and greatest of Star Trek technology is a fucking ATV. And it has wheels. How does that make sense? Just take the shuttle directly to each location. Or why not some sort of cool hovercraft? Just very weird for me to see wheels in Starfleet. It feels very out of place. But I guess it's important to show how much Picard likes driving it. He's clearly having some sort of midlife crisis at the age of 65 or whatever he is in this movie. And it makes him completely unrecognizable to the audience. In any case, they end up finding a robotic arm, a torso, several other body parts, including a head, which of course looks exactly like Data. I'm not sure why each individual body part is giving off a positronic signal. I would think only his brain would do that, but I'm not Dr. Sung. They load everything into their shitty Land Rover, and then a group of Mad Max Fury Road aliens show up out of nowhere, and they start shooting at them. And a chase ensues. Worf is shooting back. So now they are 100% violating the Prime Directive here. I mean, the aliens even see them escape onto the shuttle and leave the atmosphere. And I probably shouldn't call them aliens if this is their home world, but you get what I'm saying. This is a pre-warp society, and the existence of aliens was just confirmed for them. And you could argue that the presence of the android body already broke the Prime Directive, but only if they knew about it, and it doesn't seem like they did. Personally, I hate the Prime Directive. I think it's overly rigid and doesn't make a lot of sense most of the time, but it's just so weird to see it so casually broken here. Like, they just do not give a shit. It's really weird. And back on the Enterprise, they study the android. Turns out his name is B4, which is already kind of obnoxious to me. And he will kind of be the Jar Jar Binks of this movie. He really doesn't know much of anything. He's very rudimentary, to say the least. He looks at Riker and asks, why does the tall man have a furry face? So that's what we're dealing with here. And Data explains to him that he is his brother. Now, Dr. Sung never mentioned anything about an android before Lore. In fact, in the episode Brothers, he specifically said that Lore was the first. So this is just another shameless retcon. And Data wants to basically upload his memories to B4 so that he'll potentially be a little bit more like Data. Which seems kind of crazy, because what if he turns out to be more like Lore than Data? They have no idea what this android's intentions are. But stupidity is the name of the game when it comes to this movie. And in the meantime, Picard gets a message from Admiral Janeway. That's right. Voyager made it home and Janeway has been promoted to Admiral. So if you're one of the people that thinks Janeway is evil because what happened with Tuvix and various other incidents, this probably only bolsters your argument because Starfleet tends to prefer evil people for the Admiralty. And she tells Picard that the Enterprise is being ordered to Romulus for a diplomatic mission. There's a new Praetor, and it turns out he's a Reman named Shinzon, which is obviously unprecedented. Although I don't think Shinzon specifically asked for Picard, which, as we'll soon find out, doesn't make any sense. But either way, they're heading to Romulus. And Data gives a presentation on what the hell Remans are, because we never saw or heard anything about them before. They are apparently an undesirable caste within the Romulan Empire. Their home planet, Remus, is used as a dilithium mine. They're essentially slaves to the Romulans. And one side of Remus faces the sun at all times, and the rest is just complete darkness. Which, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because are they saying the planet doesn't rotate? Like it's moving around the sun, but it's not spinning? So one side is kind of always facing away from the sun? I don't know. That's what Data said, and I'm just a little confused by it. It's either dumb or I am, or both, but moving on. They also talk about Shinzon himself. Little is known about him. They just know that he fought 12 major engagements during the Dominion War, all successful. Which is, again, a little surprising. The Romulans joined the war very late. DS9 is a 7-season show, and the Romulans didn't join the Dominion War until the end of Season 6. I'm a little surprised that there were 12 major engagements for the Romulans and Remans to fight. But they need to build this guy up a little bit to show that he's a brilliant tactician. So they have to list all of his achievements. Even though, as we'll soon see, his tactical mind is dog shit. But we'll get to that later. Actually, we'll get to it right now, because the Enterprise shows up at Romulus, and they wait for 17 hours for Shinzon to meet them. Troi confirms they're out there somewhere, so they're obviously cloaked. Later on, we'll find out that Shinzon, the tactical genius, is very short on time. So the fact that they're being made to wait for almost a full day is insane. The Reman ship finally decloaks, and we get a good look at it. It's called the Scimitar, and it's absolutely massive. The design is pretty cool, I'll give it that, but I hate this ship. I hate it because it's basically a flawless super ship that can do anything. Worf's tactical analysis shows that it has 52 disruptor banks, 27 torpedo bays, primary and secondary shields. It also has a completely undetectable cloaking device, and it can fire all of its weapons while cloaked. And with the exception of the Klingon bird of prey prototype in Star Trek VI, starships in Star Trek can't fire when cloaked. And it makes sense why they can't fire while cloaked, because cloaking uses energy. So in order to cloak, they have to transfer that energy from someplace else. But this ship doesn't have those limitations. It makes my head hurt. Oh, it's also a Reman ship. So this race of slaves built a starship in secret, and it's more advanced than anything we've seen in Star Trek up to this point. I mean, you tell me, am I nitpicking, or is this just really, really stupid? And we get our first look at a Reman in the form of Shinzon's Viceroy. And he's weirdly played by Ron Perlman. I don't know why he's in this movie. It honestly could have been anyone. And the Remans were obviously designed with Nosferatu in mind. They're very vampiric. I mean, they're even afraid of light. And he invites Picard to the Scimitar to meet Shinzon. So Picard, Riker, Worf, Data, and Troi beam over. Who the fuck is left in command of the Enterprise? They're in hostile territory right now, and they just left either Geordi or Crusher in command of the ship. Okay, smart. They finally meet Shinzon in a dimly lit auditorium, and it's still weird to see Tom Hardy in this movie. He is completely unrecognizable, and I think it's telling that he is far more proud of his work on the Venom movies than he is of Star Trek Nemesis, and he should be. The Venom movies are legitimately better than this, as sad as that is. And the Remans are not comfortable in the light, as I mentioned, but despite the darkness, it's pretty obvious that Shinzon is human. He talks about unity and peace with the Federation. He also creeps on Troi. Shinzon raises the lighting in the room so they can get a better look at him, and Picard has this shocked look on his face, and the movie acts as though the audience is supposed to be shocked also. Now, obviously, Shinzon is a younger clone of Picard. We know that now, but if you're watching this in the movie theater for the first time in 2002, that's not really being conveyed at all. Because surely they wouldn't just shave a British actor's head and say, he's Patrick Stewart's clone. That wouldn't make any sense. But that's exactly what they did. And Shinzon goes on to talk about how he had a very rare syndrome that runs in the family. It affected his hearing. And of course, Picard had the same affliction when he was younger. But now that Shinzon has been cured, he says he can hear, see, feel just as well as Picard can. It's very ominous. He's telling them without telling them in a way that's really hitting them over the head. He invites Picard to dinner, and as he puts it, just the two of us, or should I say, just the one of us. I mean, if this is their idea of subtlety, I don't know. It's really bad. They really do hit you over the head with this nonsense. And Shinzon gives Data a sample of his blood, and they head back to the Enterprise. They analyze the blood, which of course reveals that Shinzon is a clone of Picard. And at their dinner, Shinzon explains that the Romulan government planned to replace Picard with Shinzon at some point, but a new government rose to power and the plan was abandoned. And as a result, they sent Shinzon to the dilithium mines of Remus. Why they wouldn't have just killed him, I'll never know. I know that's kind of just as cruel as making him a slave, but this is the Romulan Empire we're talking about here. It just makes no practical sense to keep him alive as slave labor. And of course, the Reman that would eventually become his viceroy protected him, and they became fast friends. So that's nice. And now that Shinzon has miraculously and cartoonishly gained power, all he wants is freedom and peace for the Reman people, or so he claims. And Picard is hesitant to trust him, but he gives a pretty good Picard speech about how he believes in the ideal that all races can be united. What better example of that than a Starfleet captain standing in the Romulan Senate? He says nothing would please him more than to take Shinzon's hand in friendship when that trust has been earned. It's good dialogue for Picard, and it would have been a lot better if it had any impact on the movie, but it does not. And in the meantime, B4 is apparently left to his own devices. He uses a computer, and he seems to download some key files. However, the Enterprise crew detects this, and they begin tracing the source of the unauthorized access. And Picard decides to take a look at a picture of himself from the Academy. And what do you know? It's just bald Tom Hardy, which doesn't make any sense. We've seen what Picard looked like at the Academy, and he had hair. But even in the context of this movie, it still doesn't make sense, because at their dinner, Shinzon tries to explain why he looks different by talking about how the Romulans broke his nose and jaw. And yet, in this picture, it's exactly the same fucking dude. I mean, it's laughable. And it's at this point, Data discovers that it was B4 behind the unauthorized access. And he tells Picard he thinks that they can use this to their advantage. They also detected a trace amount of Thalaron radiation coming from the scimitar when it decloaked. And Thalaron radiation is apparently illegal, very dangerous. It would take only a small amount to kill everyone on the Enterprise. So between this and what B4's been doing, they have good reason to distrust Shinzon, but it's about to get even worse. And it hasn't been a great movie so far, but this is the point where it really takes a nosedive for me. Riker and Troi have sex. That's not the problem. The problem is that Shinzon uses his Reman Viceroy's telepathic abilities to, and there's no other way to put it, rape Deanna Troi. That is what happens here. Both Shinzon and the Viceroy invade Troi's mind and violate her sexually. They may not be in the room with her, but the result is the same. They rape her, which by itself is awful, but it's even more awful because it happens for literally no reason. Why did Shinzon spend so much time trying to convince Picard that he is the genuine article, that he's a freedom fighter seeking peace? And he throws it all away by forcing himself on Troi. It makes no sense whatsoever. And after this horrendous scene is over, Shinzon beams B4 aboard the scimitar, or what he thinks is B4, and he begins downloading all the information he stole from the Enterprise. It's also worth noting that this portion of this idiot's plan was entirely dependent on the Enterprise finding the dismembered body of B4 on a random planet and then activating him. I mean, what a genius. What foresight he had to know that would happen. And on the Enterprise, Troi gets examined by Crusher. Physically, she's fine, but it was clearly very traumatizing for her. And fearing that she's become a liability, she asks to be relieved of duty. And Picard denies her request and asks if she can endure more of these assaults, hoping to gain some sort of tactical advantage from them. I mean, that is just crazy for Picard to say. Yeah, I know you were just assaulted by this guy, but I'm going to need you to go ahead and let it happen again. That would be great. I mean, holy shit. Not only is this movie stupid, but it's also pretty appalling at times. And it's at this point Picard gets beamed away to the Scimitar. I realize this is a diplomatic mission, but they are alone in the heart of the Romulan Empire. The fact that they weren't at least at yellow alert, meaning that their shields would be up, is beyond me. In any case, Shinzon reveals his plan. He plans to download any files B4 accessed from the Enterprise so that he can know the exact location of Starfleet's vessels. He says that his own life is meaningless as long as Picard is still alive. And it turns out that Shinzon was engineered so that his body would age faster at a certain point so he could catch up to Picard's age and replace him. But when that didn't happen, his body started breaking down, and now he needs a full blood transfusion in order to live, and he can only get that from Picard, which of course would kill Picard. And he goes on to say that if Picard had lived his life, he'd be doing exactly the same thing. Which, you know, this whole movie tries to push this kind of nature versus nurture theme. It doesn't really work. I mean, they only push the narrative in a couple of scenes, and it doesn't really stick. Because no, Picard would not be doing this if he had lived Shinzon's life. Say whatever you like about Picard, but his choices have logic to them. They have purpose. He has goals that make sense. Shinzon doesn't. He now fully reveals his plan to Picard. He wants to take the Thalaron radiation weapon to Earth and annihilate it, which in his mind will allow him to totally defeat the Federation. Does that make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me. According to Picard himself, in First Contact, the Federation is made up of over 150 worlds. Destroying Earth would be devastating, but it would not be the end of the conflict. It would only start a war in which the Klingon Empire would be delighted to come to the aid of the Federation, especially with Martok as the Chancellor. Basically, my point is that even if they're successful in this mission to destroy Earth, it would be the end of the Romulan Empire. And it turns out that Data was posing as B4 this whole time. So whatever they downloaded from him was false information. How they didn't detect that it was B4, I'll never know. I mean, they've already established that there are subtle differences between Data and B4. They made a point of saying that B4 has a redundant memory port that Data doesn't have. So you'd think that would have been a red flag for the Riemann crew, but it is not. So Data sneaks in and frees Picard. He shows Picard a prototype emergency transport unit which will automatically beam one person back to the Enterprise. But they decide to find a way off the ship together. So they run and gun their way through the ship to the shuttle bay. Picard is dual-wielding a phaser rifle and a hand phaser at the same time. He's like Duke Nukem. It's absurd. They hop in a Riemann TIE fighter, and they make it to the Enterprise and escape to warp. What a relief. I was on the edge of my seat. And in the observation lounge on the Enterprise, they discuss their next steps. They determine that Shinzon is definitely planning on destroying Earth. Riker says if they destroy humanity, they cripple the Federation. I mean, it doesn't even hinder their ability to build starships because the vast majority of Starfleet ships are constructed on Mars. So it really is a laughable plot. But they reason that because Shinzon's health is failing, he will likely go after Picard first to save himself. So they go to Red Alert and prepare for battle against the Magic Reman ship that can do anything. How exciting. They're also on their way to rendezvous with a fleet of starships. They call it a fleet. But you can see on the monitor that it's just 7 ships, which is pretty small for a fleet. In naval terms, I believe that would be more of a task unit or battle group. But fleet sounds cooler. And I don't know why I'm even talking about this, because all 7 of those ships will be complete non-factors in this confrontation. And Data and Picard have a very brief conversation about the thing that is trying to be a theme in this movie, nature versus nurture. Would Picard be evil if he was raised the way Shinzon was? Would B4 be Data if he was Data, I guess, is the comparison. I don't know. The dialogue is not terrible, but it's just not landing. Nothing really sticks to landing in this movie. And they finally get attacked by the scimitar. It's firing while cloaked, of course, because why not? And the Enterprise fires phasers in all directions, which I think is a pretty smart move. One minor thing that bothered me about the Star Trek VI battle with the cloaked bird of prey was that the Enterprise never tries just firing randomly. I mean, it probably wouldn't have worked, especially considering that a bird of prey is a much smaller target than the scimitar, but I still think it was probably worth a shot. No pun intended. And the fight doesn't go well. The Enterprise is already kind of at the scimitar's mercy, and Shinzon sends a hologram of himself to Picard's ready room. How he does this, I'll never know. But basically, Shinzon wants Picard to surrender. He offers to spare the Enterprise if he does. And Picard gives him another good Picard speech. He talks about how being human is about exploring your potential. The potential to make yourself more than you are. And it seems to almost work. Shinzon falters and says he can't fight what he is. But then he rejects Picard's words and leaves. I mean, it's made even weirder by the fact that Shinzon hesitates. It's like he knows that what he's doing is wrong and pointless. But he's still committed to doing it. I think this movie would have been a lot better, or at least a little better, if it had actually worked. What's a bigger Picard flex than talking down his enemy? I mean, if he had said this to me, it would have worked. But it doesn't work on Shinzon. And that's because we need a big action sequence, apparently. The battle continues, and 2 Romulan warbirds show up to help out the Enterprise. One of them is commanded by this person. Her name is Commander Dinatra. She is one of the Romulan military personnel who supported the assassination of the Senate and Shinzon's ascension to Praetor. Both she and her co-conspirators made this happen on the understanding that Shinzon would use his super ship to destroy Earth. And now she is opposing Shinzon for what reason? She doesn't want blood on her hands. But her hands are already bloody, and she is now opposing Shinzon for the exact same reason that she supported him in the first place. Because he's going to destroy Earth. Oh, this is bad. This is bad. It's so bad. It's even more ridiculous because both Romulan ships immediately get disabled by the scimitar. It's kind of hilarious. I mean, Picard offered to buy Commander Dinatra a drink when this is over. A drink! Yeah, I owe you a drink. I mean, you started this whole fucking thing. It wouldn't have happened if you didn't conspire to kill the Romulan Senate, but thanks for coming in at the last possible second and doing absolutely nothing. Oh, the pain. And this fucking clown show continues when Troi uses her empathic abilities to find Shinzon's viceroy, which on its own is actually fairly clever, but how they do it is absurd. They have Troi holding Worf's hands over the weapons console. She's guiding his hands to the right location. Why does she need Worf's hands at all? Why can't she use her own hands? It's not like Worf is the only Starfleet officer on this ship who can fire weapons. It makes no fucking sense. I think I'm cracking up. I'm losing it. She finds the Viceroy. She knows where the scimitar is. She uses Worf's hands to fire. It's a success, and now it's a little bit more of an even fight. And Shinzon is getting desperate. He tells his fuck-up of a Viceroy to prepare a boarding party and capture Picard. I'm guessing there are some gaps in the Enterprise's shields, which makes sense, or the scimitar could just beam through the shields. It honestly wouldn't surprise me. So Riker and Worf take a security team to stop the boarding party, which honestly should not be too difficult because it looks like there's no more than 8 Remans. And Worf tells Riker that the Romulans fought with honor. So this is incredible. With one line of dialogue, they decided to lazily conclude an aspect of Worf's character arc. Now he respects Romulans. And why does he respect them? Well, let's do the rundown, shall we? The Romulans stage a coup, put a psychopath with a magic starship in power, in the hopes that he would eradicate the human race. And then they decided that would be a bit much. So they showed up at the last minute to try to help the Enterprise and then did nothing and died. But at least they fought with honor. And if there's one thing that could possibly be perceived as a turning point for these Romulans, it's that Commander Denatra was rejected by Shinzon sexually. She tried to make a move on him, and he basically told her to fuck off. So she said, you know what? Maybe genocide is bad. It's just... I mean, if you put 16-year-old me back in 2002 on the set of this movie, I would have thrown a fit. I would have flipped over the fucking craft service table and thrown a fucking booyah-bass at Stuart Baird's face. They would have escorted me off the lot. No question about it. Anyway, where are we? Oh, of course. There's a shootout in the halls of the Enterprise. It's fine. It makes sense. At least until the Viceroy decides to jump down a garbage chute like Han Solo on the fucking Death Star. So he just straight up leaves behind his men. Why? I don't know. And of course, Riker goes after him because we need to have a fight scene, and Riker wants to avenge the assault on his wife. It's basic bitch storytelling. And why the fuck is there just a chute that goes to a whole different deck? Is this where the crew sends their fucking laundry? I have no idea what's going on here. And Riker fights the Viceroy, and it's weird because the Viceroy runs away when he seemingly has the upper hand. So I'm fairly convinced this dude just straight up has shit for brains. Eventually the fight leads to a bridge, which nearly collapses because of the incoming scimitar attacks. And Riker kicks the Viceroy to his death, and he might as well have said, I have had enough of you.
I have had enough of you!
And this Viceroy just falls into an abyss. Why is there an abyss on the Enterprise? I don't know, but good riddance. He was one half of a mind rapist tag team, and he had the IQ of a toenail. And on the bridge, the scimitar seems poised to finish off the Enterprise, but it just positions itself right in front of the Enterprise and doesn't fire. No reason for this other than to give Picard the opportunity to do something, which he does. He decides to crash the Enterprise into the scimitar, and Troi is at the helm. So she unfortunately crashes the Enterprise twice. The first time it wasn't her fault, and the second time she was ordered to do it, but regardless, it made her a meme. So the Enterprise approaches the scimitar, and Shinzon says, "Hard to port," which would be a sound strategy if they weren't completely stationary. I mean, this is basically the equivalent of turning your steering wheel to the left while the car is in park. So naturally it does nothing. The Enterprise crashes into the scimitar with really no regard for any Starfleet personnel in the front of the Enterprise. They're just dead. Tragic. The scimitar pulls away from the Enterprise, ripping apart both ships, and then Shinzon gives the order to deploy the Thalaron weapon, which will take 7 fucking minutes to fire. I guess this ship does have one flaw. And Picard wants to set the Enterprise's auto-destruct, but the auto-destruct is offline, which makes no sense. They still have power, they have air and gravity, but somehow the auto-destruct is offline, because plot. And Troi says, how can he do this? He'll kill you. And Picard says, it's not about me anymore, which is hilarious, because he's about to beam himself over to the scimitar and solo the entire crew. It's not about me anymore, so I'm going to do something to make it more about me. He beams over, and the transporter immediately goes down. Tragic. And while Picard is in Duke Nukem mode again, Data decides to just jump out of a hole in the Enterprise and fly over to the scimitar like Superman. It's bad. He also gets inside the ship by just opening a hatch. It's that easy, apparently. And while this is happening, Picard fights Shinzon, and he eventually kills him by ripping a piece of the stage down and stabbing him with it. I mean, what the fuck is this thing? How should Picard defeat the bad guy? Oh, we'll just have him rip this random spike off the wall and impale him like he's Vlad Tepes. That makes sense and totally something Picard would do, right? Man, what a movie. And it's not done yet, because despite the fact that the Thalaron weapon is about to destroy the Enterprise, Picard just stands there, frozen, as if we're supposed to believe that he feels as though he's lost some kind of brother or son here. I mean, he gave this diseased idiot so many chances. I mean, maybe I'm a sociopath. I'll let you decide. But if a fucked up looking mind rapist, genocidal clone of myself was trying to kill me and everyone I know, I would have stomped on this thing's head until the fucking cows came home. And I'd say, oh man, that was close, wasn't it? Did you see his face? He looked like a swollen testicle. And then we'd all have a good laugh, and that would be it. We'd all move on. But Picard is too frozen in his emotional diarrhea to save the day. But luckily, Data shows up, so that's nice. He puts the emergency transport unit on Picard, and he beams away. Data says goodbye, and then he fires his phaser at the Thalaron radiation device, and the ship explodes, killing Data. Picard is now back on the Enterprise bridge, and everyone is shocked by Data's death, but the day is saved, so at least there's that. And they all get together with a glass of Chateau Picard, and they toast Commander Data. And this should have been an emotional gut punch. And I'm not opposed to Data dying. It makes sense. It kind of completes his arc. I mean, what's more human than sacrificing yourself for the people you care about? But dying in this movie feels so terrible. It's so unearned. And it really is just sad, and not sad in the context of the story. I mean just sad that this is actually how they decided to end the Next Generation era. credit to the actors in this scene. It's well documented that they couldn't stand the director. And I think they knew it was a weak story, but they're doing their best to give this scene the emotion that it deserves. Riker reflects on the first time he met Data. It was on the holodeck, and Data was trying to whistle, but he can't remember what the tune was. It was Pop Goes the Weasel, and I'm just somewhat happy that the people who wrote this movie actually remembered something that happened in Star Trek The Next Generation. And as the Enterprise is in space dock getting repaired, Picard talks to B4, who seems just as childlike as ever. He doesn't really understand anything that's happened, but then he starts singing the tune to Blue Skies, which indicates that a part of Data is alive somewhere in B4's brain, leaving the door open for the possibility that Data may someday reemerge. But sadly, he will not. He will go on to live, die, and live again on Star Trek Picard. How thrilling. Data is basically Kenny from South Park with a positronic brain. And that's the movie. Holy shit, what a train wreck. Overall, atrocious. I probably have watched this about 5 or 6 times since it came out in 2002. And it gets worse every time. Why they decided to do this, I will never know. But this movie is the thing I point to when I'm trying to figure out what exactly killed Star Trek. It was incredibly unpopular at the time, and I don't think too many opinions on it have softened over the years. And it opened in December of 2002, so happy 22nd anniversary to this movie. And it went up against The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. So even if this movie was good, it still would have been dead on arrival. And it was infamously directed by Stuart Baird, who has had a very long, successful career as an editor, but for some reason was allowed to direct this movie. He was apparently very cold and disrespectful to the cast and crew, most notably LeVar Burton. He couldn't remember his name, and he thought that Geordi was an alien. I guess that's the kind of person you want directing a Star Trek movie. Just an opportunist who didn't really care about Star Trek. He was just hoping to use the franchise as a stepping stone for his career, but it failed. And I suppose we can at least be grateful for that. And from top to bottom, the story is just a disaster. I'm not a writer on any level, but I think I could probably come up with something better than this. The story for this movie was written by John Logan, Rick Berman, and Brent Spiner. Now, only one of those guys is a writer, John Logan. I mean, Brent Spiner is an actor, great actor, but he's not a writer. And Rick Berman is a producer. I mean, he's written some things technically, and he deserves credit for taking the Star Trek baton after Gene Roddenberry, but he's not much of a writer, in my opinion. He kept Star Trek going for a long time, but he also kind of killed it. In my opinion, at least. Let me know if you feel differently. And I think it's still dead. I mean, so much of current Star Trek reminds me of this movie. Star Trek Picard is very much an extension of Star Trek Nemesis. Mindless action, plot holes, Easter eggs, and death. Sounds just like life. And if you think about it, the last 5 Star Trek movies, going all the way back to Insurrection, have all involved a villain hell-bent on revenge. Insurrection, Nemesis, and all 3 J.J. Abrams movies are about revenge. And I love First Contact, but it could even be 6 if you want to include the Borg Queen from that movie as well. They really just desperately want another Khan, and it's not working. And I'm going to make a weird comparison with this movie. In the movie Logan, where Logan is speaking to Laura, a young clone of himself. So there's already some similarities there. And with his dying words, Logan says, "Don't be what they made you." It's a great scene. It's a great movie. But that is the kind of thing I wish could have happened with Shinzon. Picard makes the same point to him, but with Shinzon, it doesn't work. And I think it should have worked. It might have denied us a few mindless action sequences, but it would have been much more in the spirit of Star Trek. If Shinzon could have changed his ways and proven that deep down he is not only human, but also, for all intents and purposes, Jean-Luc Picard. You know, it might not have made the movie great, but I think it would have at least made it more of a Star Trek movie. But I am burnt out. I should probably wrap this up. If you somehow stuck around this long, thanks so much for watching, and let me know what you think about Star Trek Nemesis. Do you hate it as much as me? Is it your favorite Star Trek movie? Or is it somewhere in between? Let me know. But that is all I've got for now. So until next time, take it easy.
Marvelous. How easily humans do that. I still need much practice.